Yesterday, Kempton Park in Johannesburg hosted the final G20 Empowerment of Women Working Groups meeting, bringing together delegates from G20 member states, guest nations and international organizations. Under South Africa's presidency, the discussions focused on three critical areas: financial inclusion, the care economy and gender-based violence. The aim is to advance global commitments to women's economic empowerment ahead of the main G20 Summit in November. The meetings culminated in the adoption of the Ministerial Declaration, marking a significant milestone in international efforts to promote gender equality. To help us unpack South Africa's role in shaping this agenda and what these discussions mean for women both locally and globally, we're joined by the Deputy Minister from the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Steve Letskike. Deputy Minister, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Can you give us an encapsulation of what that ministerial statement and declaration entailed?
Good afternoon to you and to the SABC viewers. Indeed, yesterday we've concluded a very successful ministerial meeting that is focusing on empowerment of women, and a working group that brought all the different countries of G20, but including the guest countries and various partners from private sector, civil society, and development partners for that matter. Three priorities we went into these discussions. You would understand this was the fourth gathering from technical meetings until this ministerial meeting that resolved not to really release a declaration, but to have a chairperson statement. The three priorities that we've discussed throughout was around care economy that focuses on unpaid care work that often has women as a having a barrier into participating in the economy actively so. And the second one was really looking at the financial inclusion, and part of it really is about how do we look at the participation of women in the economy, access to finances, access to markets, but also access to really making sure that women can take the economy into their hands and participate actively. The third one, of course, we focused on the gender-based violence. You would understand that this affects all of us, not only just South Africa, but it has actually come out, evidently so that the rest of the world, many of the G20 partners are still battling with gender-based violence. And we looked at those priorities that speaks to the role of government in responding to these three fundamental issues.
Let's talk about financial inclusion. The gender wage gap is still real, particularly across developing nation states that are part of the G20. In South Africa, for every R1 a man earns, a woman only earns 78 cents. What are the real practical steps that can be taken to close the gender wage gap?
You are spot on, because you would understand that even despite progress that we've had around gender equality, women remain at the disadvantage when compared to their male counterparts. And in fact, when you look at it globally, women represent 55% of unbanked people and 70%, that we are picking up from many of our G20 countries, have women-led SMMEs and are estimated to be really financially unserved for that matter. But some of the practical things we've discussed include that we need to allow women, to access credit, insurance, savings, and other financial services. And additionally to that, open all other aspects of work. Access to land, property rights and assets are the critical components of financial inclusion for that matter. But what we have also just discussed and looked at as part of the priorities advanced by all member states for that matter, it's about how we improve women's access to financial service to contribute to their own social and economic power. So the G20 has included financial inclusion as one of the main pillars of the developmental agenda that will help us to achieve gender equality, but as well as economic growth for all people that will prosper. So those are some of the areas we are looking into domesticating, but also taking forward. You would understand and accept here in South Africa, there's been so much progress, whether you're looking at the work done by various departments, whether you're looking at the improvement of the Public Procurement Act that actually advances women-led businesses. So these are some of the progress that really helps us, and the role of financial financial institutions
Yeah.
in contributing to the work.
Then let's talk about women-led businesses, because what we realize and what we also know is that most of the businesses in the informal sector of the economy are women-owned, women-operated, and those are often the businesses on the periphery of access to the sort of credit facilities that you're talking about. And the answer that institutions like banks give us is that what we need to be able to do is formalize these businesses before we're able to give them these sorts of things. But we've seen many countries, Brazil, the predecessor to the G20 chairmanship, was a country that was able to bridge the gap and say we don't need to formalize necessarily in the informal sector for them to be considered a meaningful part of the economy, that there are other ways of doing it. In what ways that the discussions in these technical meetings unfold around the informal economy and women being trapped largely into that cycle?
Look, the main thing here is really how do we look at financial viable of boosting the informal sector. For us as South Africa, and for many other countries for that matter, we do know that informal sector has existed for centuries. We know that. But we have to then look at, if you're going to boost it, you have to then say, what do we need to service? And part of it is to then say, you want women to be able to have financial literacy, to have confidence, but also to look at methods where they are able to be bankable, where they are able to have access to additional financial institution. No woman who's running a small business doesn't want to see it grow. And part of it is to then say what strategies, what policies that can build and boost, but the environment the women are operating in. Here, the woman who's selling magwinya, the spaza shops and all of that, and you can see there's improvements, but indeed issues of compliance, issues of access, issues of connecting women to markets, including local markets and local growth, will really rely on what we do. So we cannot divorce ourselves from the realization of policies that are reformed to serve informal sector. This is a big sector that will mean so much. We're seeing it in Johannesburg, in Cape Town, in KwaZulu-Natal, everywhere, including in rural communities. Informal sector exists, but it needs to be a capable informal sector. It needs to be a compliant informal sector, and it also needs to serve, the benefit of those who are owning it.
Yeah. Let's talk about unpaid care work, which is one of the 3 priorities that you raised there. Now, there's literature on how to quantify unpaid care work and how to categorize care work, but it's inconclusive. Talk to us about how that unfolded in those technical meetings.
Well, look, there are quite a number of things. Let me just highlight 3 things, because this includes taking into consideration the various aspects that has to do with responsibility at the household level. You would understand childcare, domestic chores and caregiving for elderly or for children and so forth. And that often is invisible and undervalued for that matter. And this is why we're lifting it to saying, what is the barrier that really prohibits women to participate in the economy? But also the result here is the time spent, that really speaks to the level that perpetuate women into, poverty and limiting their participation in education, employment, or entrepreneurial opportunities. And then also that burden on its own, we have to really speak to what is the primary that shoulders women and girls for that matter. And these conditions are found at a young age, and that follows people into their livelihood or life for life for that matter. So what we then said, there are key advantages when we pay attention and close attention to the care economy. And that part of it is to devote our efforts and policies to look at unpaid care that puts women at the center, but also nurture it to create opportunities, equal opportunities for that matter. So we need to value this unpaid work and then saying, how do we compensate that? And all countries, that actively participated have looked into it.
Yeah, and then gender-based violence, and this is the epidemic that's been plaguing South Africa. We are one of the world's leading capitals on rape, and these are just stats that are harrowing. And of course, I would imagine that it took up a great deal of the time spent in these technical meetings. Talk us through how that unfolded.
Indeed, you are quite spot on to saying GBV affects all of us, and it's actually seen as a global human rights challenge. And we know the challenges that remain speaks to how and who it affects, and predominantly this is women, girls, and disadvantaged or a vulnerable population. But it's also rooted, and countries were discussing where is it rooted. It's rooted in patriarchal norms and systematic gender inequalities. And this ultimately, gender-based violence does not only harm women physically and psychologically, but it also limits their participation economically. If you are being beaten up, you are being abused, you are being pushed back, your potential is not experienced and enjoyed by the economy or society. But the advantage here that many of the countries are discussing is what can we introduce as some of the things that will help us prevent. As part of it, we spent a lot of time talking about positive masculinity, and you can really see that there are new forms of ways that we can address it, the role of men, and how do we support all societies. But at the same time, how do we invest our effort in survivors, including dealing with justice issues where justice must be so fast. But at the same time, one of the issues that came out is dealing with the cyberbullying, online violence that perpetuate this. So all governments have really spoken about how do we use policy, how do we allocate financing to empower women economically, but also how do we deal with equal access to all other issues of education, health, sanitation, and safety. So the part of this bulk of this discussion really also lifted what we've all been discussing from the Beijing platform, where we spoke about gender budgeting, that our monies, our resources must actually get to the survivor and the people. And also our policies must relate to that and our strategies. And we have been doing it. And we hope that part of this chairperson's statement delivered by Minister could enhance that.
Yeah, Deputy Minister, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it.